I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you're showing up for this fierce, highly emotional, high stakes duel.
Okay, setting the scene. I'm with you.
Right. So you've been preparing for this. Your heart is pounding. Cortisol is just flooding your system. You're sweating. You draw your sword, ready to fight for your life, your honor, your reputation.
Whole 9 yards.
Exactly. You charge onto the battlefield, and as you close the distance, you realize the person standing across from you didn't bring a sword.
Oh, wow. What do they have?
They brought a clipboard. They're just quietly standing there, observing the angle of your blade, taking notes on how your hands are shaking, just logging your elevated heart rate as an interesting data point.
That's an incredibly unsettling image.
Right.
Just that sudden jarring realization that this life or death struggle you thought you were locked into doesn't actually exist outside your own head. You're fighting a war and the other person is conducting a study.
And that terrifyingly asymmetrical dynamic is exactly what we're unpacking in today's deep dive. Welcome in, by the way.
Glad to be here. This source document we're looking at today is just wild.
It really is. It's frankly like a psychological thriller disguised as an academic methodology paper.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it.
So it outlines this radical cognitive disconnect between two individuals. On one side, we have a subject the text refers to as Zhang San, who is waging this desperate, exhausting private war.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side, you have the creator of the text, who is engaged in this clinical, completely detached academic training.
Right. And our mission today is to really explore this extreme misalignment. We're going to look at the mechanics of this disconnect, the rather chilling ethical boundaries of data anonymization, and basically what happens when raw human emotion goes up against an automated AI production system.
Yeah, because the core of this document isn't just a simple misunderstanding between two people. It's a clinical observation of two individuals inhabiting completely incompatible reality.
Like they aren't even on the same planet.
Exactly. So Zhang San operates under the absolute certainty that he is the victim of a targeted, highly personal revenge plot. In his mind, he's battling this vengeful former partner who's actively trying to ruin his reputation.
Stalking his digital footprint, destroying his life, all of that.
Right. So every single piece of content the creator puts out, Zhang San interprets as a direct, malicious strike against him.
But the creator's reality, the actual reality driving the situation, is light years away from any sort of interpersonal drama. I mean, they aren't plotting revenge at all.
No, not even close.
They are using Zhang San purely as input data. He is literally a living, breathing case study for them.
Yeah, the creator is just utilizing his reactions to train their own systematic thinking. They're honing their academic writing and testing AI tools for an upcoming postdoctoral research project.
It's so detached. And the text actually diagnoses Zhang San's fundamental problem here. It says he's trapped in a, quote, sexual or romantic narrative script.
Which is a vital concept in cognitive psychology, by the way. I mean, as humans, we don't experience raw reality. We experience reality filtered through the narrative frameworks we've built over our lifetimes.
We're biologically wired for social survival, right?
Exactly. So our brains naturally default to interpersonal drama. Zhang San's cognitive framework only contains concepts like relationship entanglement, emotional venting, and personal vendettas.
That's his whole lens.
Right, because that is the only lens he has. When he encounters the creator's highly systematic, detached academic analysis, his brain literally cannot process it as anything other than a personal attack.
He's just projecting his only available narrative onto a blank wall. It's like a communication breakdown where two people aren't just speaking different languages, they're playing entirely different sports.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like Zhang San thinks they are in a boxing ring. But the researcher isn't even in the building. The researcher is observing the boxing ring via satellite, charting the physics of how a boxer swings at empty air.
Swings at empty air, yeah.
But I do have a question here. If the researcher is just quietly observing, how does this feedback loop actually function? Like, how is it possible that every single reaction Zhang San has, his anxiety, his complaints to his childhood friends, how does that perfectly feed back into the researcher's data set without him realizing it?
Well, it functions flawlessly, specifically because he remains entirely unaware of his role. Think about the mechanics of a closed-loop data system.
Okay.
Every time Zhang San obsessively checks the creator's channel, every time he spirals into a panic and vents to his friends, every time he tries to decode these hidden attacks in the content, he is generating fresh, highly detailed behavioral data.
So he's doing the work for them.
Basically, yeah. He internalizes the researcher's sterile academic output, converts it into a perceived personal threat, and reacts.
And the researcher just sits back, observes that reaction, categorizes the pattern, and adds it to the data set.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that the researcher has zero desire to argue with him or correct his misunderstanding. I mean, you don't argue with a petri dish, right?
Wow. You just watch what the bacteria does when you introduce a new variable.
Exactly.
But that phrase, you don't argue with the petri dish, that really brings us to the ethics of this entire operation. Because observing someone's acute psychological distress, watching them spiral into paranoia, and using that as fuel for your postdoc research.
It sounds a bit sketchy.
Yeah, it sounds inherently predatory. But the researcher justifies this through strict, uncompromising desensitization.
They do. They lean entirely on the established boundaries of academic ethics. The golden rule of observational research is the protection of the subject's identity.
Which they follow to the letter.
They really do.
Yeah.
The text details how the creator meticulously scrubs every single identifiable anchor. They strip away real names, dates, precise locations.
Right, so the subject just becomes the pseudonym Zhang San.
Yep. And other individuals in his orbit are reduced to literal numbers, like 045, or generic placeholders, like Wang Ergu.
And geographic anchors become like a city or B town.
Exactly. They turn a messy real-world conflict into an algebraic equation.
Which is wild, because
Yeah.
the analytical framework isn't interested in the gossip. It doesn't care who did what to whom. It is exclusively focused on power structures, behavioral patterns, and the underlying psychological mechanisms.
Precisely. By mathematically removing the specific identifiers, the researcher adheres perfectly to academic ethics.
Yeah.
They guarantee the participant's privacy is protected.
So absolutely zero harm comes to Zhang San's real-world reputation.
Right.
But wait, let's look at the practical result of that protection, because it creates this massive, almost horrifying loophole.
Oh, with YouTube.
Yes, the text mentions that Zhang San gets so overwhelmed by this perceived harassment that he tries to report the creator's videos to YouTube. He is slamming the report button, claiming his privacy is being violated, that he's being stalked.
And the platform finds no violation.
Absolutely none. How is that possible?
Well, think about how content moderation algorithms work. They are trained to look for PII, personally identifiable information, doxing, real names, addresses, target threats. When the YouTube algorithm scans the creator's content, It doesn't see a targeted harassment campaign. It just sees abstract sociological analysis about a theoretical Zhang San in a city.
So the algorithm looks at it and says, this is a lecture on power dynamics, not a hit piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Zhang San is screaming in his monitor like, that's me. They are talking about my life.
So he can't prove it.
He can't prove it to YouTube and he can't prove it to anyone else because the context linking the data to his flesh and blood existence has been surgically amputated.
I gotta say, while this is ethically sound by academic standards because it protects his privacy, isn't there something deeply ironic here?
How so?
By perfectly anonymizing him, the creator has stripped away all of his emotional weight. They've turned a flesh and blood human with real anxiety into a mere symbol. Does adhering strictly to ethics actually make the whole thing feel more detached and ruthless?
That is the ultimate paradox of anonymization. By adhering to the ethical mandate to protect his identity, the researcher also effectively strips away his humanity within the context of the study.
He's no longer a human being experiencing visceral pain. He's a deconstructible symbol.
And the text is unflinching about this. For the researcher, Zhang San ceases to be an object for emotional exchange. He is just an observable phenomenon.
It's just a completely impenetrable shield. By perfectly anonymizing him, the researcher has neutralized him. And there's something deeply ruthless about that.
It really means Zhang San can't even land a punch if he tries, because his opponent doesn't acknowledge him as a combatant.
Which makes the futility of his situation just agonizing. And this is really where the creator's central literary metaphor becomes devastatingly accurate. The text frames this entire dynamic through the lens of Don Quixote and the windmill.
It is a brilliantly precise mapping of the psychology at play. The tragedy of Don Quixote wasn't that he was a bad fighter. It was a fundamental tragedy of perception.
Right.
When Don Quixote looked out across the Spanish countryside, his cognitive framework, which is entirely built on romantic tales of chivalry, dictated that he was looking at a terrifying, malicious giant.
A monster that needed to be slain.
Exactly. But the audience and his squire Sancho Panza, they're standing outside of that delusion. They just see a windmill doing exactly what a windmill is designed to do.
And when Don Quixote spurs his horse, lowers his lance, and charges at full speed into the windmill, the mechanism of the windmill doesn't change.
Not at all. The windmill doesn't feel malice toward the knight. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't feel the impact of the lance. It simply continues to turn according to the immutable laws of physics and aerodynamics.
And the text draws a direct causal parallel here, right?
Yes. Zhang San's lance is his frantic manual snooping, his desperate reporting to YouTube, his attempts to fabricate counter-narratives to save face with his friends.
All of that is him attacking the giant, but the researcher is just the windmill.
The researcher feels absolutely nothing. They don't register the attacks because they aren't operating in the space where those attacks have mass. They just keep turning the crank, outputting content, synthesizing data.
But if we look closer at how a windmill actually works, the metaphor gets even darker. A windmill doesn't just ignore the environment, right? It harnesses it.
Right, it needs wind to function.
Exactly. It takes kinetic energy and converts it into mechanical work. In this scenario, the windmill doesn't hate Don Quixote, it just needs wind. And Zhang San's panic, his obsessive refreshing of the page, his dramatic emotional reactions, that is exactly the wind keeping the researcher's academic progress spinning.
He is physically powering the very machine he thinks he's trying to dismantle.
It's unbelievable.
And to compound the tragedy, Don Quixote eventually realizes his error. At the end of the novel, his sanity returns. He recognizes the windmills for what they are.
But Zhang San doesn't get that.
No, the text points out that Zhang San lacks even that possibility for redemption. His cognitive framework doesn't contain the concept of an academic AI training process. He literally lacks the vocabulary to understand what is happening to him.
He doesn't know he's fighting an inanimate object.
Exactly.
So let's transition from the literary world to the technological reality of this text. Because the source document doesn't stop at Don Quixote. It takes this concept of futile combat and scales it up to describe an extreme modern technological asymmetry.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
It is no longer just a deluded knight fighting a wooden structure. It is a biological human being fighting an automated machine. The text frames this final crushing reality as human flesh versus the AI system.
And this is where the creator's structural analysis becomes incredibly grim. When you break down the actual tools each side is bringing to this interaction, the imbalance is staggering.
Looking at Zhang San's arsenal, it is tragically analog. He's relying entirely on his own biological endurance. The tech literally uses the visceral phrase, human flesh.
Because he's spending hours of his finite day sitting in front of a screen, manually hitting refresh on the creator's channel.
Yeah, he's physically absorbing the physiological toll of cognitive dissonance, the cortisol, the elevated heart rate, the sleep deprivation.
And he is burning up his limited human brain bandwidth, trying to maintain this complex web of lies to appease his parents and his current partner, 045.
He is literally exhausting his cellular energy.
Now compare that biological deterioration to the creator's digital arsenal. The researcher isn't using emotion, and they certainly aren't using manual labor. They are leveraging artificial intelligence.
Like Notebook LM, right?
Yes, the text specifically details the use of Notebook LM, an AI tool designed to ingest massive amounts of data, instantly synthesize it, and output comprehensive materials.
And they use it to instantly generate, 15 videos?
15 distinct videos and one full English interview in a fraction of the time it would take a human.
And it isn't just the speed, it's the barrier to entry they build. The researcher organizes every output through a rigid theoretical academic framework, deploying C1 level English and dense sociological jargon.
That language barrier acts as a cryptographic shield. It creates an immense cognitive load for Zhang San.
Oh, for sure.
For him to even attempt to understand the so-called attacks, he has to manually translate, interpret, and process highly dense material that is completely foreign to his romantic narrative script.
Which brings up a big question. Is this even a fair fight anymore?
Not at all.
The text calls it a dimensional strike, and that phrasing is perfect. The subject has zero chance of winning because he's trying to defeat an emotionless system using his own raw emotional exhaustion. What does it mean for us when our personal conflicts can be so easily outpaced and commodified by AI tools?
It highlights the ultimate chilling irony of the digital age that this text uncovers. We tend to view our personal conflicts as sacred, as deeply important. But to a system designed to harvest data, our outrage is just free labor.
It's just a metric.
Yeah. Zhang San thinks he's a warrior defending his honor on a battlefield. But structurally, economically, he's functioning as an unpaid data entry clerk. He is generating rich, continuous, highly detailed behavioral patterns for an AI production system that doesn't need to sleep, doesn't feel stress, and just genuinely doesn't care about his feelings.
It's the ultimate irony of free labor, the commodification of human anxiety. Because his consumption speed can never, ever match the AI's production speed. Every action Zhang San takes is based on a flawed premise, which guarantees his defeat.
Right. He assumes it's a personal grudge, so he tries to win a social victory. But he's just a data sample.
He assumes the goal is to get the creator to stop attacking him.
But the creator isn't attacking him. They are fulfilling the requirements of an academic program completely detached from his existence.
He thinks he's fighting a person, but he is fighting a system.
And because his underlying assumptions are entirely false, every tactical move he makes backfires. If he aggressively engages and watches the content, he drains his own biological energy and provides the researcher with a wealth of new behavioral data.
Just feeding the beast.
Right. And if he finally gives up and stops watching, the researcher simply notes that the behavioral loop has naturally concluded, closes the data set, and moves on to publish the paper.
There is no win condition for Zhang San. You cannot defeat an opponent who isn't playing the same game.
The creator has the ultimate, unbeatable advantage in this dynamic. Absolute absence.
Yeah. They don't need to persuade Zhang San. They don't require an apology. They don't need him to admit defeat or validate their feelings.
They simply need to keep observing the petri dish and turning the windmill.
Which is just, it's heavy. This text really serves as a profound dissection of how our cognitive frameworks don't just interpret our reality, they construct our reality.
Absolutely. If the only vocabulary you possess is the vocabulary of interpersonal drama and victimization, you will inevitably turn every complex, systemic process you encounter into a personal enemy.
You will see giants everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
It's a tragedy of wasted energy. As we pull all these threads together to sum this up, the sheer, absolute, tragic absurdity of Zhang San's position is hard to shake. He is pouring his blood, sweat, and emotional bandwidth into a void.
The complete void.
He is fighting a non-existent opponent, entirely unaware that his daily panic attacks, his obsessive snooping, his frantic text messages to his friends, all of it is just going to be distilled into a sterile footnote in a postdoctoral paper.
A paper that has absolutely nothing to do with him personally.
Right, and by the time he ever realizes it, if his cognitive framework ever even allows him to realize it, the paper will be published, the AI will be trained, and the researcher will have long since moved on to a new data set.
He'll be left standing on a battlefield alone, swinging his sword at the wind, completely exhausted.
Which leaves us with a fairly provocative thought to take away from this deep dive, something to ponder long after we wrap up here. We spent this entire time analyzing Zhang San's delusion, but the truth is, human cognition works the same way for all of us.
Oh, for sure. We all have our own frameworks.
Right. If our cognitive frameworks dictate our reality, how often are you the one trapped in a self-made narrative script? Think about it. How many times in your own life have you wasted your emotional bandwidth fighting windmills?
The humbling question.
It really is. How often have we entirely misinterpreted the intentions of others or the detached systemic actions of a company or an algorithm and driven ourselves to exhaustion because we assumed we were the main character in their story?
When in reality, we were just data passing quietly through their system.
Exactly. So the next time you find yourself showing up to an emotional battle, your heart pounding, your sword in hand, take a step back. Look closely at the person across from you. Make sure they aren't just holding a clipboard.